Since its creation, the Panama Canal has played a huge role in our society. Along with world trade skyrocketing, communication, goods, and money have also increased. But when you take into account the workers' lives, the environment, the economy, foreign relations, and technology, not all of these things were beneficial. Now, 100 years after the completion of construction, we have a stronger sense as to what the pros outweigh the cons.
Contrary to common belief, construction of the Panama Canal began with the French in the mid-1800s. Ferdinand de Lesseps, architect of the successful Suez Canal, was put in charge with permission from Colombia, which, at the time, controlled the region of Panama. Ferdinand de Lesseps had corresponded with Americans in the 1850s to build a railroad which became essential during construction later on. In 1880, the French began hauling machinery along the canal route, a 48-mile strip of land between the Caribbean and Pacific Oceans. However, in 1883, a yellow fever epidemic hit the workers, causing panic and over 100 deaths that year. De Lesseps pushed the project forward, but yellow fever continued to amount its death toll, a total of 22,000 by 1888. On top of that, the French encountered unstoppable landslides, rain, earthquakes, and flooding. The jungles were full of snakes, machinery was lost in swamps, and a string of mountains barred the Pacific coast. After only 8 years of attempted construction, the French discontinued the project and left everything, including workers and machinery, behind. Almost 2 decades later, Americans began to discuss construction of a canal through the Central American Isthmus. At the time, it took 67 days and 12,000 miles to travel from San Francisco to Florida by boat, which was a major setback given America's booming industries and trade capabilities. In 1900, the Isthmian Canal Commission, created by President McKinley, proposed construction through Nicaragua instead of Panama, so as to start with a clean slate. However, when President Teddy Roosevelt stepped in, he rejected this proposition, instead advocating for a canal through Panama in the same spot as the French effort. A canal through Panama would be shorter, straighter, cost less to run, and already had a railroad. With Teddy Roosevelt's convincing appeal, Congress agreed on his proposition. Colombia, on the other hand, did not. Colombia was not keen on having any westernized presence in its territory because of past colonization and imperialism. So when the American Congress proposed a treaty, Colombia unanimously rejected it. Roosevelt quickly overcame this setback by the use of sly strategy. Panamanian elite had been planning a revolution to gain independence from Colombia for years. Roosevelt took this opportunity to make a proposition to the rebellious Panamanians. They would let him build a canal in their territory if he helped them win their revolution. The Panamanians agreed, and on November 2, 1903, the U.S. sent 8 battleships to defend the Panamanian coastline and guard against Colombian attacks. After only 1 day of attempted warfare, the Colombians gave up. Panamanian independence was officially recognized by the U.S. on November 3, 1903. The Hay-Bunay-Varilla Treaty of 1903 gave the U.S. a 10-mile wide strip of land for the canal and a $10 million immediate payment to Panama, followed by an annual payment of $250,000 to Panama. The U.S. in return guaranteed independence to Panama. When President Roosevelt gave him the go-ahead in 1904, lead engineer John Wallace started in on the 10-year canal project. At the beginning, the U.S. maintained a collaborative relationship with Panama because of its help with gaining Panama's independence, but relations got increasingly worse as the U.S. took more control. In 1913, a Panamanian ambassador said,
"Our country has the canal within its own territory and therefore enjoys the greatest advantage. The market for the products consumed by ships passing from one ocean to the other or arriving at the canal's terminal ports is a market that naturally belongs to Panama, and no other country can handle our competition."
The Isthmian Canal Commission, a small group of high-ranking U.S. officials, made all canal decisions from workers' lives to health risks, not allowing Panama to have any say in the 500-square-mile portion of their territory. Panama, however, did not debate this issue because it was indebted to the U.S. and would possibly lose its sovereignty from Colombia again if the U.S. left. Even so, the canal got off to a successful start. Workers began to diligently excavate the canal route, and for the first several months there were no major setbacks. The Panama Canal was the largest technological feat in U.S. history at the time it was built. With the original plan of cutting straight across the isthmus, excavation was a challenge. 95-ton steam shovels could dig 8 tons of earth in one scoop, and steam shovels, rock drills, and dynamite eventually excavated around 96 million cubic yards. However, workers did not know where to put the rock once it was out of the ground, especially from the mountainous Culebra Cut. Mounds began to build up on the sides of the canal, adding to the already devastating landslides. The old French railroad system often broke down, and there was no other way to take rock out of the area. In 1905, new chief engineer John Stevens ordered the digging to stop in order to build a new railroad. He fixed rail cars to be capable of traversing different types of terrain, and tracks themselves were movable. Stevens designed digging in the Culebra Cut to travel from each side of the mountains inwards so that empty cars would go up the incline and full cars would go downwards, a system that was considered an engineering feat. Also, the yearly rainy season caused the Chagres River to overflow, resulting in floods that covered large portions of the canal, and landslides devastated months of work. Unable to stand it any longer, Chief Engineer Stevens made the monumental decision of creating a lock system, which would raise ships above sea level while crossing the isthmus in order to eliminate possibilities of the devastating flooding and to reduce landslides.
The ship would be raised by a series of locks.
These locks are each going to be these huge concrete structures, more than 3 football fields long. They're going to hold tens of millions of gallons of water. Them to raise ships up over the American continent, in effect.
What it was to set up a series of steps, hydraulically elevate the ship, where the boats will go up a step, come across.
It would sail across the artificial lake, go through Culebra Cut, which of course now didn't need to be cut out nearly so drastically, and then would descend again in steps down into the Pacific and away.
In addition, dams provided hydroelectric energy for the locks to run. Balanced, hollow lock gates allowed for maximum energy and time efficiency. The driving force behind this advanced construction was the workers. At the start of the canal project, hundreds of graduates or white working men flocked to the canal in order to take part in an event that would change history. It began with a total of 3,500 men, which included 1,500 white Americans and 2,000 West Indians left over from the French effort. After the first year, the Canal Commission recruited thousands more workers. All workers worked long, hard days, but because of racism by head engineer John Stevens, the West Indians had it much worse. A majority migrated from Barbados in order to earn money for their families. Unfortunately for them, workers were separated by race to work different jobs for different pay. Skilled white Americans, who constituted about 5,000 workers annually, worked as blacksmiths, carpenters, drill operators, and plumbers. They received fair wages in the form of gold coinage. West Indians, on the other hand, made up about 15,000 workers per year and had to do back-breaking work, including shoveling areas of dirt that machines could not reach or hauling dynamite. The most dangerous place to work was the Culebra Cut, where 300 drills operated 24 hours a day. Explosions constantly threw debris. The climate was unbearably hot, and rain and landslides resulted in countless injuries. The workers crudely called it Hell's Gorge. Unlike white workers, West Indians were paid 10 cents an hour in silver, resulting in the derogatory name Silvermen. When new head engineer George Washington Goethals stepped in 1907, the process became more militaristic. There were workers' strikes, which he quickly ended by putting in cheap West Indian workers, and only whites were given labor rights. Everything from railroad to international post was under his control, creating a dictatorial but efficient system. All work exceeded expectations in quality and time. Even though time and quality of work were excellent, it was an expensive project. Annually, the Panama Canal creates about $1.8 billion in fees for Panama. Between 1903 and 1914, the U.S. spent about $302 million, which would be about $4.4 billion in today's terms. The Panamanian region gains the most from the canal because of the huge amount of ship traffic and tourism going through the area, despite spending nearly $2 billion per year. Within the first year of work, there was an outbreak of yellow fever and malaria. Because yellow fever had caused the abandonment of the French effort, American officials and workers were immediately concerned. 75% of white workers returned home, and engineer Stevens could not find new skilled workers. Fortunately, a man named Dr. William C. Gorgas arrived on the scene just in time. As a U.S. Army physician, Gorgas had experience in tropical diseases. He revealed to the incredulous canal officials that yellow fever was a disease caused by mosquitoes, a discovery that changed the course of the canal effort. In the largest health campaign in U.S. history, Gorgas combed through the mountains and jungles of the canal region, killing every single mosquito. Homes had to be aired, screens were placed around urban water sources, and larvae were doused in oil until yellow fever had been officially eradicated. This was a medical breakthrough not only for Panama, but for the world. A final complication to canal construction was the environment. Fresh water became scarce, with almost 2 billion gallons being poured into the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans each day. This also reduced the amount of fresh water being flushed into Lake Gatun, a man-made lake created specifically for the Panama Canal. When the canal was built, rivers were diverted and the lake was created, which cut off fresh water supply to the eastern side of Panama. During the dry seasons in Panama, the canal uses up the water that is needed for other things. In 1906, President Roosevelt himself paid a visit to the canal. This was the first time in U.S. history that a president spent time in a foreign country while in office. He enthusiastically encouraged workers by giving them pride in their work, and a famous photograph was taken of him operating a shovel. Roosevelt's travel sparked interest of the American public. News coverage of the canal increased dramatically, and Panama even became a tourist destination. Finally, after 10 years of work, the canal was finished. The Culebra Cut was the last area to be excavated, and in 1913 waterways were opened to fill lakes while dikes were opened to let ocean water rush in. In total, around 5,000 workers died on the job from disease, natural disasters, or dynamite, and the remaining West Indian workers simply returned home with not much more money than when they left. Approximately 2 million cubic yards of concrete were poured for each lock, and thousands of tons of machinery had been used. The first ship to go through the locks was called the Cristobal. It made it through with no mishaps. Ever since August 15, 1914, the Panama Canal has been operating smoothly with only a few changes. Changes to the canal began in 1977 with President Jimmy Carter. After the canal's construction, relations with Panama had gone downhill because of the high level of control that American officials were exerting on the region. Therefore, in 1977, President Carter signed the Panama Canal Treaty with Panama. He believed it was unfair for the U.S. to economically exploit an area hundreds of miles from the U.S. border. This treaty allowed the Panama Canal to be governed completely by Panama by the year 2000. Additionally, change has been happening to the canal itself. For the past several years, Panama has been undertaking a major expansion project in order to accommodate for post-Panamax boats that are too big for the canal's narrow passages. Even though the canal's expansion has been a $5 billion project, 34,000 jobs and $5.5 billion will be injected into Panama's economy by the year 2035. Also, expansion of the Panama Canal will help relieve congestion in the LALB port, which receives most of the traffic from Asia. This year, the Panama Canal celebrates its 100th anniversary. It is impossible to overestimate the significance of the Panama Canal. The U.S. and Panama are lucky that President Teddy Roosevelt advocated for this project at the time he did. These countries have reaped the benefits ever since. Annually, close to 1 million ships go through the canal, which sustains global commerce and trade as we know it. The canal has changed the course of history and will continue to do so for years to come.